It's a joy to be back here in Cambridge. It's like a second home. I'm so delighted that Alexander spoke just before me, because what I want to speak about is the visual version of what Alexander is talking about in terms of the acoustics of the liturgy. So I want to talk a bit about the visual liturgical art aspect of our worship. And one of the reasons for this, because our subject is being Christians in the world, is that I return it again and again to the vision of Ezekiel of the temple. And an angel shows in the temple, and you notice is that near the threshold of the temple, near the altar, a stream flows. It's a very small stream initially, but as it flows further away, it gets deeper and deeper. And whenever this river goes, Ezekiel says, it brings life. So worship is like the beginning and the end of our life. It's the altar, it's the temple on which flows this river that affects every aspect of our daily life. A friend of mine is a Catholic theologian called Carmody Gray. She specialises in, as it were, the theology of ecology. And she said, if there's something going wrong in the world, in this particular case ecology, go back to its source and you'll find that worship is failing. There's something wrong with the worship, something wrong with the vision you have, and that produces wrong action. If you see wrong action, go back to the worship, go back to the worldview, and that's where you need to start. So talking about visual liturgical art, we're not just talking about a nice dewy feeling during this 2 or 3, 4 hours in church. This is the beginning and the end of everything we do the rest of the week. Our week is a moving toward that Holy Liturgy, and what we do in the Holy Liturgy will affect what we do afterwards. So we're talking here about, during this study day, about each speaker's personal experience of living out our vocation in the world. So I'm going to be personalising this a bit, first talking about the principles of the liturgy, the visual arts in the liturgy. And then I'm going to be talking about some of the things I've been involved with in training visual liturgical artists. Alexander quite rightly said there's too great a disparity between what we often talk about, that Russia converted through the profound beauty they experienced in Hagia Sophia and the actual lived experience of our worship. So I've been devoting much of my life not just trying to make beautiful visual liturgical art, but training people to increase the quality of our iconography, not just painted icons, but mosaic, frescoes, the whole of the liturgy. Because when I'm talking today about iconography, I'm not just talking about little panel icons, it's the whole of the visual liturgy. So I've been doing this 40 years professionally, full time. More and more I'm interested in the symphonic nature of the visual liturgy, how they relate together. The acoustics, the architecture, the wall painting, the frescoing. We need to think more and more of how these things work together. So I'll be talking a bit about how I've been involved practically and training people, not just make individual works of liturgical art, but try to bring this into more harmonious liturgy. So let's start from principles of the liturgy first, because worship is Pentecostal in the sense that we all declare the works of God, but in different languages, different cultures, as it were, say the same thing in a different way. So that begs the question, what are the timeless principles? What are the parameters? So I'll briefly go over these. So first of all, I think is that worship on earth images and participates in heavenly worship. This is a picture of the parish that I go to. So, and I was a hermit for 7 years. We'll see photographs of the chapel that I frescoed with saints all around. And though I was praying by myself a lot of the time, I wasn't. I was very aware that my prayer was just participation for a brief moment, a brief few hours in heavenly worship. This is why the author of Hebrews writes in Hebrews 8, verses 4 and 5, the gifts prescribed by the law serve as a sanctuary that is a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle, see to it that what you make, see to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. So God didn't tell Moses, just make up a nice building and get people to worship there. God was very specific as to what this pattern was, because the worship on earth, this is the Old Testament worship, the same applies to New Testament worship, has an icon and a reflection and participation in heavenly worship. So here, the pattern here was laid out by God as an image and an icon of things in heaven. The tabernacle is wood and gold, so that's a type, a visual prophecy of Christ, human and divine. Inside was the bed of manna, the tablets of the law. All of these things were images of what was to come. Secondly, this is another principle of heavenly worship. It's Pentecostal. In other words, different cultures can say the same thing in different ways. So let's read the text in the book of Acts. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now they were staying in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard the sound, the crowd came together in bewilderment, because each one heard their own language being spoken. We hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues. Though it's not literally true, there is a story that the apostles were declaring the creed, the Nicene Creed. Though it's obviously not literally true, it's the truth that they were declaring the same faith, but in different languages. So we know, for example, architecturally, that though Russian churches started like Byzantine ones, they gradually developed their own language. They developed the onion dome, for example, perhaps for practical reasons, to shed snow, we don't know. But the Georgian church, the early church in Britain, developed its own tongue, its own language to express the same things. The third element of liturgical worship, the material world and our material bodies are an integral part of our being in God's image and our movement ever deeper into theosis, into union with God. So we can't talk of worship without matter. Worship is sung, we use our mouth, but we can't have full worship without involving the material world. And this is because, as St. Irenaeus affirms, we're made in God's image as a union of body and spirit. It's not our spirit rattling around inside us that's in God's image, and the body is just some discardable thing. So St. Irenaeus says, soul and spirit can be constituents of man, but they certainly cannot be the whole man. The complete man is a mixture and union, consisting of a soul which takes to itself the spirit of the Father, to which is united the flesh, which was fashioned in the image of God. Isn't that amazing? That's a pretty big thing to say. To which is united the flesh, which was fashioned in the image of God. The human person is spiritual, not by the abolition of the flesh. There would then be the spirit of man or the spirit of God, not a spiritual man. In other words, he's saying that to be in God's image is to be a whole union of matter and spirit. But when the spirit is mingled with soul and united with created matter, then through the outpouring of the spirit, the complete man is produced. This is man in the image and likeness of God. A man with soul only, lacking spirit is psychic, in other words, just soulless. Such a man is carnal, unfinished, incomplete. He has in his created body the image of God, but he has not acquired the likeness to God through the Spirit. There's so much there, but basically I just wanted to affirm that because we are a union of body and spirit, our liturgy must also work on the visual aspect to it, the matter, the material stuff. Otherwise it's an impoverished liturgy. And I'm astounded really that a lot of energy is put rightly into hymnography and chanting, but not so much into the visual. And I'm interested that both in Catholic, Anglican, and sadly also Orthodox seminaries, I haven't come across one seminary that gives importance to the visual liturgical arts. It's like an add-on. St. Bledina's has just started the Sacred Art Institute. That's the first, I think. St. Tikhon's, fortunately, is starting up an iconographic school. But even there, there's a danger that it's just a school where you teach people how to paint little panel icons. We need something much more robust than this, a much more holistic approach. So that if an architect's designing a church, he's got to also think of the surfaces. Am I creating surfaces that are suitable in the future for frescoes or mosaic? Am I creating a church that's good acoustically? Am I creating a space that will work with liturgical movement? When we get furnishings made, I'm thinking of the whole, how will that furnishing affect the acoustics? Aesthetically, even though we don't have figures carved on the benches around the outside, it still comprises a big bulk, a big mass. So it's going to have a profound effect on the aesthetics of the church. So matter does matter. The fourth element that's important, I think, of visual liturgical art in our worship is the fact that we act as we see. I mentioned earlier that if there's wrong action, either as individuals or in a culture, go back to our vision. If there's right action, it means that we're seeing correctly. If there's wrong action, we're seeing incorrectly. And a good example is the story of the Good Samaritan. So we have this man who's beaten up, robbed, and left lying on the side. And three people walk by. There's a Levite, who's like an Oxford Don, studying theology. And a priest walks by. They see the man, but they walk on. A third man comes on, a heretic, the Good Samaritan. He sees the same man. Physically, all three of them see the same thing. But the Good Samaritan stops, and he helps the man. So clearly, they see with the eye of the heart in a different way. The first two see this man as an interruption to their important work, perhaps to rush off and do a service or rushing off to university in time to give a lecture. So this beaten up man is an interruption. The Samaritan sees that this man in the gutter is flesh of his flesh. He's a fellow human. St. Maximus the Confessor said that the origin of sin is to divide human nature up. If I see you suffering and I realise that we have the same nature, I co-suffer with you. You're not a separate individual, your suffering is your business. So if I see each of you as having the same human nature, which is reality, I will act differently. So behind this good act of the Samaritan, I know it's a parable, but nonetheless it I think reflects our day-to-day life. You'll act differently. So what's that got to do with worship? I think worship is a microcosm, it's a training centre. I paint icons, make mosaics, frescoes, whatever form it is, it's the same thing, about 8-9 hours a day. So I'm confronted all the time with the saint. And that profoundly affects the way that I see people. I remember when I was frescoing the church of Philip Sherard, he died by that time, but his wife commissioned me to fresco the church that could be made in his lifetime. And because of his writing on ecology, we wanted not just saints, we also wanted representatives of the rest of the cosmos. So between each standing saint, we had a tree, each tree was different. So I bring him from outside a branch of a tree, an olive tree, say, and I'll be painting that olive tree, but in a transfigured way. I was trying to paint it as a burning bush. Not just as a bush, trying to paint it with that logos, revealing itself within. Of course, we all know that the second stage in the spiritual life is natural theology. The first is purification, the second is natural theology, which is to perceive not just the object, the tree, but the word of God that created that tree and leads that tree toward the New Jerusalem that keeps it in existence. So, painting this tree for 6 hours in a transfigured way, I went outside, and when I saw the actual tree, I saw it in a different way. So that intense time in the liturgy transformed the way that I would see people afterwards. So this is why the liturgy is so important. It is the end of the week, it's the culmination of all the good things we do, the neurosurgery, sweeping floors, cooking, whatever it is, culminates in the Eucharist. But it also happens the other way. The Eucharist transforms the way we see. So when we meet people in the gutter, we see some suffering. If we really lived the liturgy, understood what it's about and lived it, shed tears, the experience of the liturgy, it's going to profoundly affect the way we live after the liturgy. So I would say that the liturgy properly and skillfully done, be it music or the frescoes or the architecture, helps to recalibrate our vision. But like if you're singing, you can gradually get out of tune, so you need a tuning fork, don't you? Yeah, that's what the scene is. So you recalibrate the singing to be in line with the real scene. So the liturgy recalibrates our vision. We can just gradually, by iterations, lose the plot, can't we? But some of that depends on the skill of the liturgy. The more skillfully executed the liturgy is, the more profound the recalibration. That's one reason why, as far as probably about 80% of my working life are making things, 20% is in training to increase the overall, hopefully, standard of the visual liturgical arts. The fifth element of the liturgy is that the liturgy is a microcosm, a paradise planted by God, which we're then called to expand into the wider world. How many of you seen Apologise class here? That's fantastic. Well, the rest of you, we haven't done fully. You've got to go again. Have you had a chance to do Alexander?
No.
Oh, you must. You must go there and record it. Yeah, you must. It's incredible. I bring this up because this is an example of what I'm talking about. Let's go back to Genesis. God creates this fecund world, but he plants a garden. And what is a garden? It's not just leaving the wild world as it is, that a human being, or in this case God himself, interacts with this wild forest, if you like, and then they imprint their character on that garden. You can always tell a character from the gardening, the main character. I remember my favourite lecturer at university in English literature. He'd also studied art history and mathematics. He'd done a doctorate in that. He's taught once about the 17th century writers and gave slideshows of what the landscape garden was at that time, showing that the world view expressed in the literature was also expressed in the gardening. So God planted paradise, in other words, sort of gave an example, a microcosm of how he wanted us to relate to the material world. And then he says to us, Adam and Eve, care for it, but also expand it. You know, make the whole world a paradise, make the whole world a garden. So the liturgy is like this microcosm of as much as possible the ideal life. And then we don't just go on to Monday and say, well, I get on to real life now. We've got to try to make the whole of life an extension of that liturgy. So that's why we've got to get the worship as right as we can, which requires skill, obviously prayer and the inner life, but also the more skillfully it's executed, both in its visual and its acoustic architectural elements, the more, I think, clear is that vision of how we live in the world. I mean, just hearing Alexander's chant, I was crying myself. You know, I've often thought, why does beauty affect us? And I think it's because we have a memory of paradise in our souls. Don't you think? So when something touches us, it's a sense of nostalgia, not the sentimental nostalgia. We think, yes, I remember, I've been there. It's new, it's sublime, it's beyond, but also, yes, it's a homecoming, isn't it? And that doesn't just leave us with a gooey feeling, it gives you a touch of how we're supposed to live, you know, how we're supposed to see the beggar on the street, how we're supposed to see the children who are misbehaving. I've got a daughter, it's a bit difficult. I've just got to keep trying to see the real Libby behind all this trauma that a teenager goes through. So, just to give a few examples of how the liturgy can set the scene for the rest of our life. Obviously, the Eucharist being thanksgiving. The priest prays just after the Our Father. We give thanks unto you, O King invisible, who by your immeasurable might has created all things, and in the multitude of your mercies has brought all things from non-being into being. So in the Eucharist, the service of thanksgiving, we reverse the fall. Adam and Eve just took the created world without acknowledging it as an expression of God's love. And they turned their back on God, on the giver, and just sort of enjoyed the thing in itself. So it became dead for them. The created world became knowledge of evil, not knowledge of good. If they, in other words us, had received the created world of thanksgiving, it would have been knowledge of good, not of evil. I think you said Ephraim, who says that the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the created world, but if the seed of thanksgiving becomes knowledge of good. So the liturgy teaches us how to be wealthy by giving thanks for everything. If we're not thankful creatures, we become consumers, we become secular consumers. If you're not content, you want more, don't you? You get more hungry, you want to buy more, then you'll be content. Thanksgiving can radically change the secular world from a consumer society into a Eucharistic society. St. Gregor Palamas said that God is in the universe and the universe is within God. Thus all things participate in God's sustaining energy, but not in his essence. So he's saying there that when we look at the universe, we can perceive God's energies, God's uncreated energies, not his essence, through them. So another thing the liturgy can do, particularly I think iconography, if it's done well, is we see not just, as I mentioned earlier, rocks, ocean, sunrises, not just as nice events, nice things, but we perceive the fire, the logoi of God through them. And that profoundly changes the way we treat the world. So ecological disaster comes naturally from not perceiving the world as a sacred space, as a temple. Now, the world is created as a temple, isn't it, for us to worship God? Get rid of that worldview, and the world is just a means of making me rich. It's just a big bank of food, a bank of pleasure for me to consume. The third element of the liturgy, I think, that transforms the way we live, is that we offer not grapes and wheat, we offer wine and bread. In other words, these raw materials are not just given back to God unchanged, but we, through craft, through art, transform them into bread and wine, and that's what we offer. So, in the liturgy, we fulfill our priestly and prophetical and kingly role. I like to think of the king or queen and ruler as an artist. I'm king of my stones, not so I can crush the stone into nothing, but the opposite. I've got to master my stone to carve something beautiful out of it. So St. Leontius of Cyprus affirms that, in a sense, creation needs us, humans, as the priests of the universe, to make it fully articulate in the praise of God. He says that the creation does not venerate God directly by itself, but it is through me that the heavens declare the glory of God. Through me, the moon worships God. Through me, the stars glorify him. Through me, the waters and the showers of rain, the dew and all creation venerate God and give him glory. It's a astounding thing to say, isn't it? I mean, I think creation can praise God without us, but to give thanks to God needs us. I think this is what's meant by the human person being a macrocosm, bigger than the universe, because we're spiritual beings as well as material. So the destiny of the whole of the universe is in us, because we're bigger than the universe, being spiritual beings. It waits for us to, like the Magi, to offer it to Christ, to be its vocal expression of thanksgiving to God. So that's the theory, as it were. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty of training liturgical artists, how we can improve this theological expression of our lives. So I want to go through a few systems now of how to train. And I've been actively involved in this for the last 30 years. So the first thing is research. I think Alexander has realised this, that you can't just sort of get a nice choir to sing. I mean, what do I sing and how do I sing it? So intellectual research is really important. That's one reason why I wrote and researched the Festival Icon book, to show, among other things, that there's an incredible wealth of diversity within the Orthodox tradition of how to paint feasts. If you look at each section, the 14 feasts there covered, And one section was on the historical development of the icon. I wanted to show that that we have a more standard type of festal icon. There are other earlier versions we can draw on to give inspiration. So it needs research as well as craft. But in terms of training the actual manual skills, apprenticeships, if we can go on to the next one. Apprenticeships, I think, are the greatest way of, the next one, yeah. This is just in terms of research. I'm looking time for questions, I won't go on too long. In research, I think Sarah Panchayda's research is fantastic in that it's bringing together different aspects of the Holy Liturgy which haven't been brought together so much. So she's researched the chant, the acoustic space, the resonance, but also showing how even the choice of marble in Hagia Sophia reflected the theme of water in hymnography. So you can see it's like a river, isn't it? So these people thought holistically. Now we've got so many specialists now, this will all go own little thing, but really looking at these medieval masterpieces, they thought much more holistically. Even the choice of veining in marble was informed by the text of the hymns. And the designers of Hagia Sophia, one of whom was a mathematician, he really understood angles of incidence. He was a mathematician who specialised in that. And we've done research recently on the angle of what's called the reveals. You've got this massive dome in Hagia Sophia, and you've got lots of windows. And the windowsill is at a certain angle. It was originally in gold, I don't know if it still is. And they did a laser scan of Hagia Sophia and put it in the computer to play around with it to see how it changed things. And they found that any angle other than the angle that exists on the reveals of these windows around the base of the dome didn't produce the right reflection of light into the dome. On the computer, if they changed that angle, you got more light around the outside or on the inside. So that angle of incidence is just right to create the right reflection in the dome. And it wasn't by chance. I think they've actually found a drawing, probably a copy of Antimus's calculations of angle of incidence. So it's this holistic view which we've lost, sadly. We have to regain that. So I think training in liturgical art isn't just individual skills, but we need a new specialism, which is generalisation, bringing all these together. We need a conductor, as it were, to conduct all the different specialities together. It's there, we need to rediscover it in humility. I think, really, Philistines compared to these people. And I don't say that out of romanticism, I think it is the case. They can consistently get the right acoustics of churches in Thessaloniki. So good, the old ones. They got it right every time. It wasn't by chance. So anyway, so how to train, and I work in this, I'll give examples at the end of works I've done. I do like panel painting, fresco, mosaic, stone wood carving, silverwork. So I've been trying to train people and hand these skills on. So, next please. So there's no doubt the best way to hand these skills on is by full-time apprenticeships. So here we have Martin Earl. He came to me about 12 years ago, perhaps longer. And he was with me 7 years in the studio. So he learned from me mosaic. Here I'm making actually 2 mosaics at once. This is a massive one for a church in Houston. And I had another commission from a Russian oligarch. So we had lots of things going at once. So that's how he learned. And he's now trained someone else. Jim, I'll introduce you to Jim in a minute. So apprenticeships are exponential. So just in 7 years, just for one person, now there are 2 people and now training other people. So perhaps in 2 generations there'll be 15 people skilled in mosaic. So that's ideal. Next, please. The other apprentice I've had recently is, these are works by Martin. So I've trained him in wall painting, panel painting, stone carving, wood carving, and mosaic. I'm not saying train, I think he's just so gifted, I just need to sort of point him down direction and he runs with it. You can't train someone, you can sort of help them out. But I'm largely self-taught, just because of circumstances. So Mother Sarah gave me detailed notes made by his now Father Patrick, who studied under Leonard Spensky. So that was my main source of learning really. It's a slow process. So Martin achieved in 5 years, what it took me about 15 years, by trial and error. So it's a much more efficient way of learning than being autodidactic. Next, please. So the other apprentice I had just for 4 years was Jim here. This is not me, but I was making a mosaic for Christian, and he started his training in mosaic. But I'll go into in a few minutes what's happening at Chichester Cathedral. I was approached by them 2 years ago to start a liturgical arts centre there. So Jim and Martin are now living there. And Jim continued his apprenticeship in mosaic under Martin, and he made this commission work for the cathedral. That's an icon he's painted. So it's a sort of a following on effect. So I'm a grandfather now. Jim's like that. Been trained by one of my children as well as by me as well. Next, please. Now, some people can't spend 4 years full time as an apprentice. Jim had saved up money. He'd been a teacher, so he could be with me full time. When Martin came, I had enough commissions to pay him. So in fact, his apprenticeship didn't cost him any money. I was paying him to learn because he could help me out. But sometimes they don't have enough money to enough rather large commissions to employ someone. So one other way to do it is to be part-time. So this man, Andrew, here is a young American. He's doing my 3-year part-time course with the Prince's Foundation. We meet 7 times a year. So Andrew comes over for about 2 months, so he can have 2 of my sessions, and then he's in my studio the rest of the time. So over 3 years, he'll be with me about 6 months a year on the average. So I paid him to help out. This is a fresco, I'll show you later the finished work. He painted these around here. And this is another man who approached me, he's a stone carver. He's just becoming Orthodox and wants to supplement his carving skills with painting. So I employed him for just a few days on this work, to give him the taste. Interestingly, Martin is Catholic, Jim is Anglican, and is Catholic, Ewan is becoming Orthodox. So this apprenticeship, though it's in the Orthodox tradition, is actually ecumenical. Not by design, it's just happened that way. Next, please. Okay, so a variation of the apprenticeship system, as I mentioned, Chichester approached me 2 years ago to help start a centre there. So what's happened is that Martin and Jim have moved into the studio. In about 2 years, I have a purpose-built studio in Chichester Precincts in the actual cathedral grounds. At the moment, we're using a temporary place about half an hour's drive north from South Martin. So they had some part-time apprenticeships with people who are already skilled in one medium, but they want to be exposed to a more orthodox approach, or perhaps are painters that want to learn some mosaic, or they want to learn gilding. They're already painters, but need to know gilding. So that's a sort of a flexible system of many apprenticeships. They're advertising now for full-time apprentices to help them out. So that's got a variety of things going there. And they've got some funding through the cathedral for those apprentices full or part-time who do need some supplementary income. So we're trying to assist that. Good solid training by some financial assistance if they need it. Next, please. So it's an example. This is Jim here. So this time I've got 3 people doing mini apprenticeship. This person, actually one of my students who did my 3-year course, she's doing some mosaic here. He did a apprenticeship in gessoing. This is a big icon which Martin was commissioned to do for the Aberdeen Catholic Cathedral. So I've got 3 different people learning different skills at the same time in the same studio. That's great. Okay. 2009 it was, through the Prince of Wales, I started a 3-year part-time course in icon painting through the Prince's Foundation School of Traditional Art. So I select 12 people every 3 years, and we meet 7 times a year for 3 intense days, but I give them lots of homework, so though it's part-time, it can take 5 to 8 hours a week to do the studies I said. So it's a foundation course. I would say you need 5 years full-time to be a proficient liturgical artist. So this is a foundation course rather than fully fledged. But out of that, it comes in really good people who are now full-time. And they come from all over the world. At the moment, I've got 2 from America, most are from Britain, but some from Europe as well. So they come from all over. So that's quite a good flexible system, and it doesn't need any outside funding. It's all funded by the fees. So I'm a bit reluctant to take something on that requires continual funding from outside. It's useful, but this I deliberately set up so it's self-funding from fees. Next, please. So another form of training is a more flexible system where someone might want. I've got about 7 students like this. They're married with children, perhaps they can't take whole weeks off. So they might come for 1 day or 2 hours once a month. And they'll bring the studies that are given them. Assess them and then, as it were, give them a medicine or a study. Like their eyes might be brilliant, but their nose is a bit wonky. So give them studies to paint noses for 4 weeks, and they'll come back with their noses, and that's really good. Now we get the ears now. So it's sort of tailored to their abilities and what's happening. So that's quite a good system. It's slow and arduous, but I'm selective I'll take on. I don't want to invest time in somebody who's just tone deaf visually. Next, please. I run twice a week 5-day residential courses. I run them in this mansion here, things owners, and they have holiday apartments. These are sort of tasters. Basically, it's first come, first served, so I get lots of amateurs. But sometimes out of that, I identify people who are really gifted, and then I do an apprenticeship or do a 3-year full-time, part-time course. So they're quite good. The danger of these, of course, you get lots of amateurs around to do 2 courses, then they start taking commissions. And it's a bit sad, really. We have a lot of really low-quality icons around, partially because of these 5-day courses like this. It gives a false sense of confidence. So there's a danger to it. Next page. Next page. And then books. Books, I've written this book here, which is as much to put people off as anything. I deliberately made it quite detailed to put off to the people who want to dabble. But a lot of people I know use that to get started, then they realise they actually do need a human teacher one-to-one. So that's a sort of supplementary diet, as it were, to help along. Next, please. Next, please. I'll finish in a few seconds. So as well as train practitioners, I realised also you need to train and inspire commissioners, in other words, priests and seminarians. In Greek, the word for maker, ktiteres, the donor, means literally maker. So the maker of a church, the maker of this is Monikora. The ktiteres is this man here, Theodore Mithokites. So he's the one who commissioned it. The thing probably the emperor paid for it, but through him. So he's the maker. Without a maker, without a donor, nothing happens. So you've really got to inspire priests, future priests, wealthy people of the value of investing in good visual liturgical art. But not only just to give them money, but how to brief. So in this country, we have very few architects who understand anything about an Orthodox church. You need an architect if you're going to build a church. So the onus is on the committee or the priest, whoever, to brief them. They've got to know what effects we want. They can't tell the architect how to do it, but they're going to tell them, like, we need good acoustics, we need certain surfaces that are suitable for wall paintings. Without a good brief, the architect's lost, really. And I've been a consultant on some cathedrals where they're brought in external lighting technicians and so on. Really good, but they haven't been briefed properly. So they do all sorts of things which are nice, but they're not suitable for an Orthodox church. So I'm sort of trying to get seminaries to have a compulsory module on the principles of good liturgical art, including architecture. Next, please. Part of this, for the Chichester Centre, as I'm making a series of podcasts, this is an interview with one of my students about this is the chapel I frescoed in my hermitage. So we're doing a whole series of podcasts, which are probably more digestible than just reading scholarly text. And we're talking, I'm going to do one with Alexander in due course, really about the principles of what makes for good liturgical art. And this will hopefully inspire future tutorers, makers. So really briefly, I want to go through now some examples of our work that I've done and other people have done that are in the West, that are an application of the timeless principles of liturgical art in the West. So Andrew Gould is, I think, one of the best Orthodox architects, certainly in the West, but not in the East as well. He lives in America. So this is one example of a church that he designed for that particular place in America. He looked at the local architecture. If you were designing a church for something else in America that had more stone, he designed it for stone. So it's very good at knowing what an Orthodox church has got to have, but where there's room for variation. Next please. So that's the other end. So obviously he's drawn on the domestic architecture, but inside, and little hints here, but this is definitely an Orthodox church. So I'll just go through a few different works that I've made in the last few years. This is for a Catholic church up the road, we just finished it. I've drawn on, that doesn't show it, but this is Bethlehem and Jerusalem here. So there's no time to go into it in detail, but I've drawn particularly on the Roman Mosaic tradition. So it's a new work, but it's kind of in that Roman tradition. In fact, the next slide I think shows one of the churches that it was drawn from. So you can see here some of the inspiration. And if we go back, so what I've tried to do is to combine past, present and future. So it's eschatological. When you see colored clouds like this, it's a sign that this is depicting Christ coming from the future. This is Christ's second coming. Christ will come like the sun rising, and these are sunrise colored clouds. So this will probably be the only wall painting in that church. It's a modern church, and that's the only space really. So I tried to put everything in that I could without being cluttered. So this is Christ present now. It's the transfigured Christ, the resurrected Christ. It's the communion of the saints. It's Christ coming out of the future. Bethlehem and Jerusalem is Christ's earthly life, but also Bethlehem is the creation of the world. Jerusalem is the new Jerusalem. So I tried to adapt, drawn on the early Western icon tradition. Next, please. Next. So this is a fresco I did for my own church. It's the foundation is 8th century, the existing church is 13th century. So for this, I've drawn on the Romanesque tradition for this fresco. I made this wooden screen here, using old wood that's been chucked out, so it's actually wood, 5 centuries old. But also the way I've made it is with what's called scratch moulding, which is the old English medieval method of constructing. So that sort of fits. Next, please. You jump one. That's it. So this is just down the road. This is a folding icon screen. You can see it all folds away. This is the Orthodox parish of St. Ephraim. They've got to clear everything out after each liturgy so the Anglican parish can use it. So I looked at what existed, which was this existing wrought ironwork here, and designed this. So it looks as though it's part of a church, to be movable. So one principle of good liturgical art is that it's incarnate, it's rooted in place, but it's timeless. Next, please. So I was asked by the king to design this anointing screen. So I'm really keen that every work of liturgical art should be appropriate to its medium. So this is stitched largely. You can see it close up here, the birds. I told the embroiderers at the Royal School of Needlework, I don't want you to pretend you're painting these birds. I want you to use needlework to glorify needlework. So I want an abstract quality of these birds that bring out needlework. I don't want you to try to pretend you're painting. So that's an interesting work. So I drew a lot on different Western early things. The general idea of the tree came from some mosaics in Sicily. The birds here are inspired by Visigoth illuminated manuscripts. The branches here intertwine, that's drawn from the Celtic. And the lettering here was in part inspired by David Jones's calligraphy. Not copied, but inspired by. Next, please. In this case, stylistically, for various reasons, it wasn't anything particularly Western, it's on standard Byzantine in style, but I designed, especially the gold mosaic, to relate, this is a window here, I angled the mosaic to catch the light from that particular light source. It's done in the direct method. So that's an example of making for a particular space, not just sort of cut and paste. Next please. An example of an icon in St. B. So in designing this, I drew on early British iconography, mainly illuminated manuscripts. This church here is probably like the church one Wearmouth really was, at the monastery. It's a bit of research here, a bit like Alexander would do, researching older works, but hopefully not making pastiche, but acknowledging that those roots. Yes. I was asked to make this reliquary for St. Edward Martyr, the Brotherhood. So here are scenes in the life of the king. Here are drawn on early Saxon works. The previous Russian Archbishop of Britain asked me to make this for the Patriarch, and he was very specific. He wanted me to draw an early British tradition. So all this is drawn from, this is the crucifixion and the resurrection, and the balls here, each of them is drawn from, I think one is Celtic, one is Saxon, and the other is Romanesque, I think. So there I tried to draw on our own metalwork tradition and carved tradition. Next, please. This is for a church in Madrid. So the carvings on one side, and these carvings were inspired by Visigoth and other early Spanish works. This is a Russian church, so I draw on early Russian ideas here. There are some doors in Russia which are made with this method of gold on copper. So you've got the major feasts here. Next, please. So there are the details there. Interestingly, when Martin approached me asking if he could be my apprentice, I had this commission, so I thought it's ideal timing. So I carved the first one of each of these, then he carved the rest. So it's happenstance, he wrote when he did. So when I was in the parish of Mother Sarah, I carved this cross figure, she's not the original. So I was really inspired. How many of you have been to the Cloister Museum in New York? Yeah. Have you seen this cloister cross? So it was carved by one of my great heroes. He was an itinerant iconographer, Master Hugo. He did illuminated manuscripts. He did the various Anglican Gospel. He did carving. He carved this ivory cross. This is inspired by, it's not a copy of it. The only thing really is based on, from that cross, are the boxes here and the tree of life. Everything else I've made up myself. So here I'm trying to reflect this wonderful prayer of the priest in the tomb with the body. That's it on the cross. In hell with the soul of God, he's in Hades here. On the throne with the Father, you fill all things, O Christ. And this is the incarnation, the baptism of Christ, and the transfiguration. So God becomes man, so man can become God by grace. So it's new, but it's sort of rooted in that old tradition. The Romanesque in this case. Oh, it doesn't show, I'm afraid, but I have to miss that one. But I've been commissioned to design a large, it's not an icon, it's done in icon style, but it's not going to be used liturgically. In commission by an Orthodox marine biologist to include aspects of gradual creation, let's call it. So I've developed it into like an alpha and omega. So you've got the different days of creation here. Here you've got paradise, the fall, the cross, the tree of life, the cross, the New Jerusalem, and the animals, sort of the lion lying down with the lamb. So it's the beginning and the end of creation all in one image. So anyway, you'll see it when it's eventually made. Sorry, it's such a bad reproduction. I think that's it, is it? Next one. That's it. Next one is the one. Yeah, I started with Pentecost, and this is finishing with Pentecost. This is a stone icon screen I carved for the Church of Amsterdam. And each of these bases here reflect a different culture within the parish. This is a combination of Russian and Georgian. These are sort of Western Romanesque, so that's like the sort of the Dutch and the German elements. This is inspired by Roman work. and this is a more Byzantine word. So it's like a Pentecostal icon. Thank you.